Sometimes you just gotta roast yourself. Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today was supposed to be like a quarter 3 writing update. I've been doing quarter updates for like every 3 months in the year basically, and my first two went very unproductively, and I kept coming on here, talking about why and being like, okay, but next quarter I'm going to do it. And I was so sure that quarter 3 would be different, but it just wasn't. And I shouldn't have been sure about that because I did move house and my horse did move yards again for the second time this year. So that's basically been my year. Like I started looking for a house in January. I was on the waiting list to move yards. I went through the whole house buying process, which takes like 6 months. So we moved in August. I moved my horse in April, and then that yard shut down really sadly. So I moved again in September, just like 2 weeks after moving into my house, which takes a lot of time. And then she had some vet stuff, and yeah, it's just been like crazy. So quarter 3 wasn't the productive month writing wise that it should have been, but what I did do was as soon as I moved in and kind of had my office set up with my bookshelves on my desk, um, I was like, okay, time to like get into a writing routine. And by that point, it had been like 8 months of barely any movement on the book. So I like going into it felt really quite lost on where I was with the story. And I think this is one of the main issues about being a slow writer or about having life get in the way midway through a project is that like by the time you come back to it, you're just like a different person. So like I started rewriting this book because I'd actually already written what I have now written. I'd written like 8 chapters, let's say 8 or 9 chapters before, like years and years ago, like 10 years ago. And I was just a different person, you know, when I came back to it. This is why I had such an issue making progress all that time ago, is because every time I came back to it, I was a different person and I had a different idea of how I wanted the story to be and my politics and things like that. Just what was my thesis statement basically. So I scrapped it and rewrote a lot of it. And in fact, I rewrote all of it, but there was certain passages I copy and pasted in from the old draft and then edited to fit. So I started that November 2023 and then was quite productive for all of 2024, minus a few months. So then 2025 was supposed to be me finishing it, and it's a bit more difficult because I'm kind of writing into unfamiliar territory. I'm writing into a portion of the book that I hadn't previously written, so it's more difficult. And that's where I'm starting to come across like problems with the world building and things that I have to then go back and figure out. So that's where I'm at currently, and that's why it's a bit sticky, especially with stuff going on in my life and not getting into routine. It's then really hard to make progress because there's a lot of issues and lack of clarity with what's already been done. So, what I did this quarter is I spent a couple of weeks where I read the book and I made a little document, and I basically did a developmental edit of what I have done already. So, I mapped out what happens in each of the chapters so far and a bit about what happens in the next chapters. I do have an overall plan for like everywhere where we go, major plot wise, character development wise. But as I write, sometimes that shifts a little bit. So where I thought I would end the chapter doesn't end up being the case. Sometimes I'm like, get the instinct of, oh, that was a really dramatic moment. That's a great way, that's a great place to stop and start up the next chapter. So there's a little bit of improv in there as well going forwards about where the chapter breaks happen, which is pretty difficult because my book is dual POV and it switches person each chapter. So things that I planned to see from my female character's point of view, then shifting to be in the male character's point of view, can completely change how the reader experiences that part of the plot. So it's actually like fairly complex and difficult, and it creates some problems, which I'll get to in a minute. Because what I want to do today is talk a little bit about how that review has gone, how it's been really helpful, and just like roast some of the flaws that I've noticed so far in my work. Because if you can't roast yourself, then like it's going to be hard to stomach other people roasting you for those same things down the line. And hopefully, if you're watching this and you're like interested in the book, you'll see, you know, I knew there were some problems, and this is how hard I'm working to try and fix those problems before it ever gets released. And this is why the book is taking so long. So, the first major glaring issue that I have in writing this book that I'm going to have to fix once I've finished the first draft, because at the moment I could tinker with these first 10, 11 chapters and get them really perfect and still not have an ending. So, what I've done is I've gone through, I've read it, I've made notes on what needs to be changed and what needs to be rewritten next, but not until I finished the first draft and gotten to the end, because the first draft is basically me telling myself the story. But there is a lot to do with the setting that needs to be changed in the future, and it might spell disaster down the line if I, you know, figure out that what I've written is mince. My novel's set basically in the United States, but like in the near future, after the climate has kind of changed the landscape slightly. So the coasts are kind of in, the sea level has risen, and there's been some extreme weather. And that's kind of the extent that I know currently. Is this place still called the United States of America? Probably not, because they aren't really states anymore. It's kind of the one big country. A little bit like Pan Am, I guess. So Pan Am is North America in the Hunger Games, and that's what it's called. But currently, like, my country of general Northern America is not got a name, which is a bit of an issue, because surely a place like that would have a name. And the city in which my characters are living is basically they think it's a big experiment, so they're living in, it's basically like a Stanford prison kind of experiment. They think that they're living inside, but it's kind of a prison camp, and it's not the only one. There's like lots of different ones. So there's lots of like population zones where during the climate disaster people were put into these specific zones where, you know, everything else was kind of left to rewild, apart from some people who resisted and stayed kind of the wild people. um and then there's these population zones. Do they have names? No. The one that we're in is kind of in near New York. I kind of have it in my mind that they can see the New York skyline, but it's kind of flooded in the distance. But that seems impossible given the like level of sea rise. So that's something I need to figure out. Maybe I should speak to kind of a climate scientists for help in mapping, because I don't think that's possible. I need a geographer to help me construct where exactly this place is, and also what the city is called, because they're not going to be called, they're probably going to be called numbers. So they could be living in like City 9. I don't know. Because I haven't come up with it yet. I haven't come up with a solution. I think if it was numbers, it would be too close to like districts in the Hunger Games. It would be like District 12, District 8, which would feel like a copy, and it's very much not like the districts. I mean, they live in poverty, but they don't have like specific trades per district. So it's not really that kind of thing. But I don't know what the alternative is. And I don't know, like, does it even need a name? Because it's kind of a collectivist society and they're kind of all working towards one shared mission. That's kind of the philosophy of their society. So maybe having city names would be too individualistic almost. I don't know. I need to come up with an answer though. That's for sure. And this extends out to like even the minutia of their daily life. I kind of know the different sections of the city. They've got kind of walled different sections where they're very class divided, and they've got names at the moment which I won't share now, but they're kind of just functional names of what that segment does or what it represents. They could have better names for sure, so I kind of need to consider this and maybe rename them. They're in a house that has a number. I need to pick a number for the house. I need to name the streets. I need to name like their workplace and the different centres and the different meetings and stuff they go to. All of these things in the real world would have names. And currently they have whatever I came up with in the moment that I was writing that and gone, oh shit, I need a name. That's just what they're named. So I need to go back once I've done the first draft and really flesh out the world and bring a bit of life into it. And the tricky thing is that this society is quite devoid of life, and it's supposed to be quite clinical because it's an experiment, so it can be a bit on the nose, and currently it is quite on the nose and like potentially quite boring. But then it feels like weak, lazy world building, which I don't want it to feel like. I want it to feel very intentional. Even the dictator and the regime at the moment, in my mind, he's not a tangible character. He's kind of this all-knowing person. He's not got any scenes because he's quite off screen. He's quite like Big Brother in 1984. So he's quite off screen, you kind of feel him through the dictatorship and what that feels like. Very similar to 1984. So I really need to think deeply about him and his motives and how think with his mind and really design this society within an inch of its life and really think about the broader country and how it's set out beyond the simple fact that there's, you know, identical, maybe, maybe not, cities with a similar goal, wild space in between, and probably indigenous and kind of people that evaded capture forming their own societies within there, kind of Last of Us style, different factions, whatnot. That's kind of what I picture. And I need to develop that like very concretely and have it make sense with what happens in the first book, because I do want it to be a series, and the series should expand the world. So I need to make sure that everything is set up in a way that works before I write myself into a corner with it. Some of the notes I've made for myself in my kind of revision document about this, besides just roasting my general awful naming systems for things, um, was things that are key facts that have to be revealed in each chapter as we go through, and thinking about weaving some of the stuff into the scenes a little better. I have already wove a lot of world building into the scenes, as well as like character backstory, the character motivations. I've tried the kind of Suzanne Collins approach of weaving in these things as they're relevant. So it's in the internal monologue, but it never feels info dumpy. It feels like, just a quick reflection the character's having. For example, in chapter one of The Hunger Games, Katniss is, waking up in bed, Prim is screaming because of the reaping. She goes about her day. She references the reaping, but she doesn't tell the reader what the reaping is. It's just slowly revealed to you. She also reflects about, how her father's died, how she has to go and hunt in the woods for food to support her family, but not in an info dumpy way. She's kind of in the action. She's literally doing that, and telling the reader about it in a very natural way in her internal monologue. And it's just woven in nicely, and then she returns to the action. You're grounded in still being very much, in the woods, or walking towards the reaping. Like you're not getting lost in pages and pages of just inner monologue. So that style is what I'm trying to emulate, and I've done it fairly well so far, but it could be a bit better. And I've just made some notes for myself to clarify, okay, this is something that actually does need to be woven in. This is something that doesn't make sense as a reader that doesn't know the inside of my brain. Something else I also came up with while doing this revision, and a way to help with the world building, was I decided I wanted to take a Blood Over Brighthaven fourth wing kind of approach, whereby each chapter starts with like a little excerpt or a little snippet of, in fourth wing, it's little excerpts from books that tell you about, threshing is this, but it's done in a very show not tell kind of way. It's just like a primary source, and it's so vague. It's just such an out of context, like boop, here's a little bit of information. that makes you go, oh shit, like it almost foreshadows what happens in the chapter, but it can also make you think something is going to happen, and then she subverts the expectation within the chapter. But the little snippet of information has you going, oh shit, like, and I love that. I thought that worked so well for Fourth Wing, especially as such an introductory fantasy for people that don't read a lot of fantasy. I thought that was a really good way to immerse someone in the world, help them understand the stakes and understand just the logic of the world without kind of overwhelming them. Blood over Brighthaven does the same thing. And I think the real strength of it is, the sources in Blood over Brighthaven, it shows you instances of colonialism or sexism that's just like within the world and within the fabric of it, within the literature, that you wouldn't have seen otherwise because you're very much locked in her POV. So you can see the colonialism or the sexism that she directly experiences or that Thomil directly experiences over the course of the story, but you don't see the wider world and the structure. But these snippets of information help reveal that. And in my book, propaganda is quite a large theme. The state themselves have a lot of propaganda, kind of informational films, propaganda films, pamphlets, things like that, educational learnings, that I can kind of design, maybe have it newspaper style, have it really stylized, and have these as the chapter openings. It's like, think of those pamphlets you saw in the 50s where it's like, how to be the best housewife for your husband. And it's all ridiculous stuff like, you need to make sure that you do the laundry before he's even asked. And you need to make sure that dinner is hot on the table when he comes home from work. And don't ask him about it because he's been stressed. And it's very patronizing. And it's very like, I'm a happy woman in my place. That's kind of the vibes we're going for in like a segment of my society in which my characters are living. They do have these gender roles, and it is this kind of white picket fence return to I don't know, make America great again, I guess. Even though the politics aren't necessarily just right wing, they kind of blend right and left wing extremism. But it is basically a make America great again kind of thing, not in necessarily in a Trump way, but in its own way. So this kind of propaganda that just explains this is what's expected of the characters and this is how they're subverting from their expectations and what the dangers of that could be, I think that could work really well. Because parts of my book aren't super action focused. There is a lot of moments where it's like the two characters talking, and like that can be entertaining and engaging as well, but it's not necessarily out in the world because it's very much a world in which people don't really talk to each other, and it's people are scared to talk to each other because they'll just rat each other out for different crimes, very 1984 style. And that can make world building a little bit more difficult. It can make teaching the reader through action more difficult. So I really want to do this propaganda idea. And as we get into the story, we also see the rebel side, and the rebels will have their own propaganda. So we can also have their propaganda as start of chapter snippets as well. And that way the reader can actually see what I'm talking about in the book. So that is one of the solutions that I'm going to put in place. But I might need a lot of help to kind of make it look the way I want to look. Like if I want to have it look like a newspaper cutting or some kind of comic strip or cartoon, I'm going to need an artist to help me. Hopefully, I get a traditional publishing deal and they can help me sort that out. Otherwise, I'm going to be struggling. Another issue that I roasted in my review of my book was about the characters. And I love my characters, and I think their arcs are really interesting, and I think they do have complexity. So, more or less, I'm happy with them. My issue is with the dual POV and having to constantly switch between the two, meaning that you only experience certain aspects of the story via one or the other, which is great and adds a lot of conflict and a lot of tension because you're wondering how the other one is interpreting it. The characters are wondering how the other is interpreting it, and you know how they'll probably interpret it because you almost know the characters better than they know each other, which is really great. And I know the characters way better than they know each other, which makes me make mistakes and I lose track of what they should know about each other. Um, and it's by virtue of me having breaks in my writing and not writing every day. Because both of them have like in-depth backstories that gradually get revealed. It's not info dumped necessarily, and they kind of gradually learn each other's story in full, and it takes quite a while for them to get all of that out. But sometimes in the inner monologue or even in conversation earlier on in the book, they think about and reference facts about the other person that they haven't learned yet, which is a problem that I'm going to now have to go and fix. And like a lot of it is by virtue of how I write dialogue. So I, have an idea of how I want the conversation to go, and then I just kind of hit play in my brain and do a kind of improv scene and write that. And improv is great and can lead to like natural dialogue, but it can lead to me just running away with the drama and what feels good. And yeah, sometimes these facts slip through the cracks that don't make sense, and then I'm going to need to fix that. I'm going to need to kind of map out not just their arcs and their backstory, but also the slow revealing of information to each other, and bear that in mind and have separate maps. Maybe I could use. There's lots of different writing platforms and writing tools. Can't think of any right now. Let me know in the comments if there's any good tools for keeping track of your world building and your characters, because there are, and I've just forgotten the name. But like, I'm just writing on a Word document. I'm just relying on my brain. It's all up here. Therefore, these facts get lost and I make mistakes that I will then have to fix later. And also by virtue of having, big gaps in, when I was writing, sometimes that backstory also changes. So the backstory I introduce, like in an internal monologue, is a certain way. And then, like, 4 chapters later, when they're actually telling each other about themselves, um, the story is slightly different. And actually, there's some quite big differences. It doesn't change the main plot too much. It doesn't really change how the characters feel about each other because that's kind of mapped for me. But it's inconsistent, so I need to decide basically which one do I prefer and stick with it and try to forget all of the other options. It's going to get to the point where I'm going to talk about the story to people once it's written and once it's like set in stone and done, and I'm just going to be wrong because it's going to be some alternate version of the story that I have stuck in my brain. And that is just like part of the issue of taking too long. So, how am I going to fix it? Well, I'm just going to decide, and then that's just going to be it. No takesy backsies. That's the story. No more improvements. Doesn't matter if you've got a better idea. It's done. No more changes. But for the moment, I'm going to focus on finishing the rest of the first draft, getting it done. I'm going to see what's changed by the time I get there, then decide on what my favourite kind of set of facts and events are, and run with that for the next proper edit. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you're writing a book as well and you're having similar issues. Roast yourself. What kind of issues are you having? What kind of solutions have you come up with? And do you have any of the issues I've mentioned with like character consistency, information, and world building consistency, especially if you have long breaks in your writing? I'll be back at the end of the year with a quarter 4 update. The whole point of me doing this revision was to kind of remind myself of the story and to get back into the flow. And then I didn't quite get back into the flow in September, to be honest. So I kind of envision the last quarter of the year the same way the last 2 November, Decembers have gone for me, to be honest, which is where I write like crazy and make a lot of progress. So maybe by the end of the year, I can be not quite done with the book, but like nearly done with the book. Maybe done like January, February. We shall see. But it's clear that I need some kind of consistent routine in order to get consistency in the story and in order to write it while I'm the person that I am before I change too much and change my mind about too much. So that is what I plan on doing. Subscribe to my channel to follow my journey and, of course, for more bookish content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!